Okay, guys, so today we're going to be talking about rabbits. We're going to go through our introduction. We'll do some basics about rabbits. We'll talk about rabbit
Yeah, sorry.
species.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Good, thanks, bud. We'll talk about rabbit species and rabbit breeds. Then we'll go over our activities and your resources. So you guys know me. I'm Aiden. I'm Megan and Lizzie's, I'm not Aiden. I'm Megan. I'm Aiden and Lizzie's mom. And it's been a long day already. I've been up since 5 working. So I'm a little bit, my brain's a little bit melty from the heat. But I work at scientist.com. And my job there has to do with animal studies. So when you guys ask for animal topics, I get really excited because I love talking about animals. And I actually used to work with rabbits in the laboratory. And we're doing these STEM classes for a couple different reasons, but one of the biggest ones is that we're all home due to the pandemic, and it's really changed the way that we talk to other people and the way we go to school and the way we work. And so this is a good way to talk to each other and to connect and even to learn new things. And I'm hoping that this information will be useful to you at some point later in your life. Okay, so now we're going to go through some basics about rabbits. So we always start out by talking about the phylogeny of animals, which is their kind of hierarchy, or the way you list them out from the biggest groups to the littlest, most specific groups. So they're in the kingdom Animalia because they're animals. They're in the phylum Chordata. They're Mammalia because they're mammals, which means they have fur, they bear live young, and they produce milk. And then they're in the order Lagomorpha. And you might have heard people talk about lagomorphs before, but there's 2 families in that order: the Leporidae, which are the hares and the rabbits, and the I think it's called Ocotonidae, which is picas. So specifically with the family for rabbits is Leporidae, but the name comes from a Greek word, which basically means that they look like hares or they look like rabbits. And there's about 91 species in here, including 30 different species of the pica that I told you about. And then there's 29 species of rabbits and 32 species of hares.
Megan,
Yes.
our Wi-Fi is very bad, so it just popped out.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll record this too in case you miss anything, okay?
Okay.
Megan,
Yes.
I did like this thing on school, on year 6. I did this on school on science.
Oh, very cool.
The kingdom and all that, the species.
That's very cool. So the lagomorphs are the Leporidae, which is all the rabbits and the hares you see over here. And then I wanted to show you this picture of their next close relative, which are the pica. And pica are really cute little silly animals. They mostly live like up in the mountains and hills, and they kind of look like tiny rabbits with shorter ears, actually. So they're the closest relative. But then when you get, so these are lagomorphs, and then when you get down into the Leporidae, which is the rabbits and hares, there's a couple different kinds. So this is the family that they're all in, and there's over 60 species in these families. So basically it just means that they resemble rabbits or hares. They're in this, and they are different from the pica because they have short furry tails and they have really long ears and hind legs. And we usually call everyone in this, this big group, we usually call all of them rabbit, except for some of the hares. And there are some differences between rabbits and hares that I will tell you guys about in a little bit. But various countries on all of the continents except for Australia and Antarctica have species of Leporidae that are supposed to be there. So there are rabbits that are found in Australia, but they were an introduced species, which is kind of a problem that we'll talk about. But they've been introduced to a lot of different places, and they pose kind of a serious threat to the habitat and to other animals in their areas. And I'll explain why they're able to do that a little bit. So some of their characteristics: they're small or medium-sized mammals, and their adaptations allow them to make really rapid movements, so they're quick. They have really long hind legs, so you can see in the skeleton, here's the pelvis and the femur, and then like the leg bones, and then down to the feet, and you can see how big they are. And there's big muscles that go along with those big long bones. And there's 4 toes on each foot, and they have kind of little short front legs with 5 toes. But what this allows them to do is hop and run very quickly. and the bottoms of their feet are actually hairy, and that allows them to have a better grip while they're running, so they can be really quick, and they use their strong claws as well for running and for digging. And the other thing that's really interesting about rabbits, or this group in general, is that they have really distinctive ears. So one of the things that we always draw, right, when we draw a bunny is their big floppy bunny ears. And they're kind of long and they're mobile, meaning they can move them around really well. So like I can't really move my ears on their own. I can wiggle them a little bit, but I can't turn them towards any sounds. But rabbits can actually do that. They can use their ears kind of like little dishes where they turn them to listen, just like you might see a cat or a dog doing. They also have really good, fairly good eyesight. So their eyes are really big and they're situated on the sides of their heads. And that allows them to watch out for predators that might be out to eat them. And their vision actually is pretty good at night, because rabbits are either nocturnal, meaning they're active in the nighttime, or they're crepuscular, meaning they're active at dawn or at dusk. So they have special kind of like reflective parts in their eyes that allow them to gather more light in so they can see when it's a lot darker than we would like. So they range in size. I said that they're small to medium. So the smallest rabbit is actually this adorable little one over here. This is called the pygmy rabbit. And those rabbits are about 25 to 29 centimeters and they weigh around 300 grams. So they're like less than half a pound. They're little itty bitty guys. And then the biggest wild rabbit species is the European hare. And those are 50 to like 76 centimeters from their head to their body. And they weigh from 2.5 to 5 kilograms. So that's about 5 to 10 pounds. So they're kind of the size of like a small dog. Wild rabbits also have kind of an interesting diet. Yes.
Hey, Mommy?
Yeah.
I was going to say, Pepper would eat one of those pygmy rabbits.
I bet she would, because they're little itty bitty.
One, but then she said Pepper would eat one for breakfast.
Yeah. So rabbits, as we all know, can be pets or they can be wild animals. And so their diet differs in both places. So wild rabbits usually eat wild plants. They really like things like dandelions and thistles, and they eat almost, the biggest part of their diet is actually grass. So just eating grass in yards and weeds and things like that. And then when people have pet rabbits, a lot of cartoons and things show them eating all carrots. But actually rabbits need to have a lot of hay and dried grass. That should be the biggest part of whatever they're eating. And fresh veggies are great, especially if they're leafy greens like kale or chard, things like that are great for them, but they actually shouldn't have that many carrots because they don't have a ton of vitamins and nutrients for the amount of calories in them. And then people with pet rabbits also usually give them a little bit of dry or pelleted food. So their main part of their diet should always be grass or dried grass like hay. And then wild plants can be like supplemented with veggies or with dry food that you can buy at the pet store. And rabbits can eat so much grass because they have kind of an interesting digestive system. So their digestive system actually allows them to eat their own poo, which is kind of silly. So, we've talked about animals before that have multiple stomachs, things like cows, where they're going through the food and the hay, go through like a fermentation process, and they have these helpful bacteria that help break down the hay. Well, rabbits don't have as much of that. So what they do is they eat these grasses and leafy greens and they go into the stomach and get partially digested. And then some fermentation happens. But then they have these special little poos that are sometimes called night soil for them, or night feces. And they actually will re-eat these little poo pellets. They're kind of like softer and wetter, and they'll eat them directly from their bottoms, and then they'll redigest them. And that basically lets them get the energy from the food twice. So they pass it through and it comes out as like kind of soft green pellets that they re-eat. And then eventually those come out again, and those are like the hard, dark brown ones that we see in the grass and things like that. So, and they do this to get as much energy and things as possible from their food, because a lot of the food they eat doesn't really have that much energy for them. So this kind of allows them to double up. They choose their food too using kind of an interesting set of teeth. So they have really powerful front teeth that are called their incisors. And this is similar to rodents. For a long time, people thought that rabbits are rodents like rats or mice, but they're actually not, even though their teeth are kind of similar. But they also have a second smaller pair of these front teeth that are kind of like right to either side. And then they don't have any canine teeth like we do with our pointy teeth, or like dogs have their kind of sharp canines, but they have a gap there. And that gap is called a diastema. So you can see here on their teeth, they've got their incisors and their auxiliary incisors. And then there's like a really long kind of wide gap where there's no teeth at all. And then it goes to premolars and molars. So they use their front teeth to like kind of bite things off, and then they chew back and forth with their premolars and their molars. So because their front incisors are so important for biting and for chewing things, they actually continue to grow. So they're eating all these grasses and hays and things, and these food parts are really tough and they're fibrous, so they're hard on their teeth and they actually wear them down. So if they didn't continuously grow their teeth, eventually they'd wear their teeth down and they wouldn't have teeth anymore and they would starve. So their teeth keep growing and growing and they get worn down. But the problem with their teeth growing forever is that sometimes when we have pet rabbits, they don't eat as much tough food, and then their teeth can grow too much. So I wanted to show you this picture. This was a rescue bunny, and he wasn't given the correct diet. So his teeth kept growing and growing. And you can see here the incisors on the bottom are way over the ones on the top. And he has something called a malocclusion, meaning they're not lined up properly. And the teeth get overgrown and they're actually really painful for the poor rabbit. So they can't eat properly and their teeth are digging into their gums. And what you have to do if something like that happens is to take them to the vet to get their teeth trimmed down. So healthy rabbit teeth, or good rabbit teeth, actually line up like this, and they allow them to bite off those tough grasses and things. So if you do have a rabbit, you have to make sure you keep a good eye on their dental health and give them lots and lots of hay and grass. And something like this would happen if you only fed your rabbit carrots like we see in the cartoons. So it's actually not good for them. And then in their habitats, so we said before that they really like eating these grasses and things, and they actually live in burrows kind of underneath the grass. So sometimes we call the burrows a warren, but the burrow usually has an opening underneath like the roots in the grass line. And you can see here with all these bunnies up on top, but they've got little tunnels through here, and there's different rooms. So here's a rabbit actually sleeping in the tunnel. And because they make these burrows, they can live in a really wide range of different habitats because they can make basically their own little houses in them. So we find rabbits in the desert. There are rabbits in the tundra. They're in the forests and mountains and swamps. And they'll dig these burrows for shelter, so kind of like a house. And the burrows differ between different kinds of rabbits, but the interesting thing is that hares actually don't usually dig a shelter. So their bodies are better for running, and rabbits have better bodies for burrowing. One of the reasons they build these shelters is because there's a lot of predators that eat rabbits. So rabbits are prey animals, and that means that they're kind of constantly on the watch, right? They're on the lookout for predators that might want to eat them. So things like foxes, badgers, lynxes, eagles, and owls, lots of different things will actually eat rabbits. So they are usually on the lookout for them using their eyes on the sides of their heads and then their ears that they can turn to listen to sounds. And they spend a lot of time scanning the area to look for predators. When they see something, they might freeze and stare at it. And sometimes if you see them freeze, they'll also thump their feet on the ground. And that thump is a warning to the other rabbits underneath the ground that there's a predator. And to survive when predators attack, sometimes they'll go into their burrows, they'll hop away in kind of a zigzaggy motion to get away. They might run, or they might kick the predator with their hind legs. So remember, their hind legs have those long bones and big muscles. And so they might do rabbit kicks to try to kick things away from them as well. And then I showed you their teeth before, and since their teeth are strong and keep growing, they also will bite. So if you have a pet rabbit, you're unlikely to be bitten by it, but rabbits do have kind of big teeth, and they will bite in order to escape and to keep themselves safe, especially if they're really scared. So if you guys remember from the Fibonacci sequence, we talked about the rabbit reproduction rate. And we talked about how that was one of the original problems that the Fibonacci sequence kind of solved, right, is the rate of reproduction in rabbits. And I put this right after the predator part and right after the like diet and habitat part, because those things are really important to the reproduction rate of rabbits. So because rabbits have so many predators, they don't really have the greatest chance of surviving from the time that they're babies. So to combat that and to be successful, rabbits just have a lot of babies. So most female rabbits can start to have babies between the time they're 3 and 8 months of age. And unlike some other animals that only have babies at a certain time of year, like maybe they all have babies in the spring, rabbits can have babies anytime. And the time that the rabbits are pregnant is actually really, really short as well. So it takes about a month for the rabbit babies to be born. And if they have kind of a shorter period, they might have less babies, and a longer, they can have like 4 baby rabbits to up to 12. And they can have another litter right after they have the first one. So female rabbit can have up to 60 new babies, or they're called kits. Female rabbit.
Hold a baby rabbit. Me too. It was very soft.
Yep, they're very soft. So they can have up to 60 a year, and you can see some little baby wild cottontails right here. And that's also one of the reasons that rabbits are bred for meat and for fur and things, is because they reproduce so quickly. Okay, so I have been talking about rabbits a lot, and I've mentioned hares too. And even though they're in the, they're both lagomorphs, there are some differences between the two. So rabbits have shorter ears and shorter legs compared to hares. And then rabbits, I mentioned the babies are called kits. And when they're born, they're blind and they don't have any hair, and they really need their mom to survive. On the side of the hare, the babies when they're born are actually called leverets, and their eyes are already open and they have a full coat of hair, and they're actually mobile and can move around on their own. So they don't need their mom quite as much. So there's a few different things between them that distinguish them. But one of the biggest things with rabbits and hares is because they reproduce so quickly and they eat like all this grass and they can reproduce so many babies, they can really be a problem if they're introduced into places that they shouldn't be. So I mentioned before that Australia and Antarctica do not have any species of rabbits that are like from there, basically. They're no endemic species. So the problem is that people have introduced rabbits into places like Australia, and because they reproduce so fast and they eat all the grasses and stuff and they burrow, they actually are really bad for the environment. And they don't have a lot of natural predators there to keep the numbers down. So they just reproduce and reproduce, and it's kind of like a big plague of rabbits. So even though rabbits are fairly successful here in the United States, and like in our yards and things like that, and we're not concerned about them, in other countries, they can actually overproduce so much that it's a really big problem. Okay, so now we're going to talk about a few different rabbit species that I thought you might be interested in. So the first one I thought looked really silly. This is the Sumatran striped rabbit. And this rabbit is actually really, really uncommon. So somebody saw one in 1972, and then no one saw one again until the year 2000. So it went about 30 years without someone seeing one of these. But since then, there's been 3 different reports of people seeing them, all in a specific national park. And one was photographed in 2007 with a camera trap. And then again in September 2008 by a scientist, and someone saw one in 2009. So we're actually seeing them more now, and they're unsure if we're seeing them more now because there are more of these rabbits, or simply because we're looking to find them. But you can see that they're kind of an interesting looking rabbit. They've got these crazy kind of stripes on them, and they live in the forest in Sumatra. Then we have this guy. This is the Bunyoro rabbit, and it's kind of a little cute rabbit that lives in a couple of places in Africa. And it actually is found in damp savannas with rocky outcrops. So it's not necessarily the habitat that we would normally think of rabbits being in, but this one's a pretty interesting species. Then we have this one. This is the natal red rock hare. And I thought this one was really strange because I could only find actually drawings of it. So it's fairly uncommon, and it's found in this one part of Africa down here. And you can see, oh, hare is spelled wrong too. It should be H-A-R-E. But you can see because it's a hare, its legs are a lot longer and its ears are a lot longer than the rabbits that we normally talk about. This little guy, the volcano rabbit, is pretty small and cute. This actually is a small rabbit that lives in mountains in Mexico, and it's the world's second smallest rabbit. So I showed you the pygmy rabbit before, but this is the second smallest, and it has kind of little rounded ears and pretty short legs and short, thick fur. And it weighs at most around a pound, so about 600 grams, and they live from about 7 to 9 years. So the volcano rabbit lives in these little groups of 2 to 5 animals in burrows, just like the other rabbits we talked about. And their burrows can be as long as 5 meters. So they actually make pretty big burrows for the size animal they are. And they have about 2 to 3 babies per litter that are born in the burrows. And they actually, pretty uncommonly, rabbits don't tend to make a lot of noise, but volcano rabbits actually have a very high-pitched sound that they make instead of thumping their feet to warn other rabbits. So they'll warn them of danger, but using this kind of very loud noise. And the populations are actually really small. So scientists think there's about 150 to 200 colonies of these rabbits with a total population of maybe only 1,200 individuals over like the entirety of their range. So they are very, very endangered, and it's kind of concerning. So they are thought to be extinct in most of their range and only exist in a couple of really small portions of their original range, and then also in captivity. Okay, this guy probably looks familiar to those of us in the US. This is a cottontail rabbit, and they are found in the Americas. There's about 20 different kinds of cottontail rabbits, but they have little stubby tails with white undersides that you can see when they run away, which is how they got their name, because their tails look like little cotton balls. And they are distributed across North and Central and South America. They have a lot of litters per year. So the adults can have like 3 litters per year, and they can have 4 to like 8 babies each time. So they actually are a very, very common kind of rabbit that we see in our backyards and in parks and things here in the US. In Europe, the most common species is the European rabbit. So this is a rabbit that is native to Southwestern Europe, so Spain, Portugal, Western France, and then also to Northwest Africa, like Morocco and Algeria. And it's been introduced in a lot of other places as well, like I mentioned before. But the odd thing about this one is that even though it's been introduced in a bunch of places over the world and caused a lot of problems with its reproduction, it's actually in decline in its native range. So it's not doing well in the places that it's supposed to be, and it's out of control with its population in places it's not supposed to be. And part of the issues that this causes are that the predators that rely on the European rabbit are also declining now. So things like Iberian lynxes and the Spanish imperial eagle that relied on rabbits for their food are having trouble now as well. So these rabbits have been introduced pretty much everywhere, and feral European rabbits in Australia have kind of devastated the ecosystem there. So it's not a great situation. They are also the source of our common breeds of rabbits that we raise for food and things like that. And I will show you some of those in a bit. So here's the little guy I showed you before. This is the pygmy rabbit, and it's actually from North America, and it's a pretty cute little guy. It's one of only 2 rabbit species here that, you know, kind of dig their own burrow. And it's a little bit different because it has a very isolated population. It's an endangered species in the Western US, and it's also very, very small. So it's 375 to 500 grams, which is at most about a pound. And their body length is under a foot in length. So the females are a little bit bigger than the males, but not by much. And you can tell this rabbit from other ones by its size, its little short ears, and its kind of gray color. So these are pretty cute. And if you happen to see one in the US, you have to get pretty lucky. This one's pretty interesting. This is the hispid hare. And there's not a lot of pictures of this guy. So it's from South Asia, and it used to be found along the foothills of the Himalayan mountains. But today its habitat is so highly fragmented that people haven't seen them in a long time. So it was actually thought for a while that people weren't sure if they were extinct or what was going on. They're endangered, and they've been listed as endangered since 1986. But very recently, someone in a national park actually was able to catch this picture of a baby hispid hare. So there was a lot of excitement because no one had seen one in about 30 years. This one is called the riverine rabbit. And people also call it a Bushman rabbit or a Bushman hare, but it's one of the most endangered mammals in the world. There's only about 500 living adults, so with maybe 1,500 total population. And this rabbit is only found in the Karoo Desert in South Africa in the Northern Cape Province, and it's also the only member of its genus. So it's a pretty specialized rabbit. And it's there's not a ton of pictures of this, obviously. But here are two I was able to find, and you can see it's got the long kind of hair-like ears. And part of the reason that these ears don't have a lot of hair probably has to do with heat dispersion. So if you remember the desert animal adaptations, this animal lives in a place that's pretty warm, so it needs to be able to disperse heat from its body. And it's actually classified now as critically endangered as well. So this one is very unlikely to be seen by any of us, but hopefully they'll start to be able to bring back this population, and maybe we'll get to see them in zoos and things like that to up the numbers. And then this one is also pretty common. This is the snowshoe hare. So this is a species of hare that is found in North America. And when I say it's common, we see it on documentaries and things like that a lot. And that's because it changes color. So in the summer, it's like this kind of brownish gray on the bottom for camouflage. And then the fur turns white during the winter to disguise it against the tundra and the snow. So it's, you can tell it apart because its ears are usually shorter than that of most other hares. And then sometimes they'll even get little black tufts of fur on the outer edge of the ears. This one doesn't happen to have any, but this one eats grasses and ferns and leaves. And in the winter, it actually eats twigs and bark from trees and things like that. So these are eaten by like lynx and other like northern predators like wolves. So a lot of times if you see these on like the Geographic Channel or you see them in Planet Earth, they'll be being chased by something quite big. So that leads me to the domestic rabbit. So domesticated rabbits are like pet rabbits, or we call them bunnies. They're actually derived, or they come from the European rabbit. So people took European rabbits and saw interesting traits in them and kept breeding for those repeatedly. And over time, we ended up with some really interesting types of rabbits. So there's tons and tons of different kinds of these. There's hundreds, but people have been breeding rabbits for food or fur since the Roman times, and we've been keeping them as pets for at least a few hundred years. So rabbits often live in people's houses now, so they're house pets, and they can be trained to use a litter box. They will come when you call them. They're good pets, except for they do need a fair amount of exercise, and they also, because they chew so much, they can damage things around your house. So you kind of have to rabbit-proof things. You don't want them chewing on cords or anything that could hurt them. The rabbits come in a bunch of different like crazy kinds. You can see this one, the Flemish giant, actually gets really, really big. And then there's some that are pretty small. Like here's one that only gets to 2.5 pounds. A lot of times they're named for their colors or the way their ears are. So the lop bunny, the fuzzy lop here, its ears actually are kind of, they don't stand up, so they lay down against its head. You can see some of these the lops have really big ears. This one's called the English spot because it has spots on it. And then there's also Angora rabbits that have this really long, super soft fur. So if you want to learn more about the different breeds of rabbit, there actually are associations of people that breed these rabbits and show them. So when Aiden and Lizzie and I were doing 4-H, there were a lot of kids that bred and showed rabbits at the fair. So they're actually a fairly popular pet. And because you get to just feed them like grass and hay and things, they can be fairly inexpensive to keep. The only thing with domestic rabbits is that you are not allowed to keep them in Australia or in some Australian states just because they're invasive and sometimes they get out or people let them go. So, but most places allow you to have rabbits. Okay, so now we're going to go through our activities. For my small friends, you guys can pick something to draw: a rabbit of any species, a rabbit warren or a burrow, or a rabbit diet. School-age friends can write a few sentences about the ecological impact of rabbits, so how we talked about them being invasive. You can create a comic about rabbits feeding, or you can draw a rabbit species of your choice and label at least 5 parts on it. And then for older friends, you can write a paragraph about predators and the impact on rabbit reproduction and habitat. You can create a comic about invasive rabbits, or you can draw a rabbit species of your choice and label at least 10 parts. And then I have a fair amount of resources here for you as well. And I will send these all along for you later, of course.